Hi there. We'll start our mince pies by preparing the mincemeat. The first step is to grate one orange on a medium grater. All the ingredients for the filling are in front of you. 1 lemon, 2 apples, allspice, butter, red wine vinegar, French brandy, raisins and sultanas. But we'll give a screenshot of the full list at the end of this video again, so don't worry. As you can see, no sugar or suet is needed. Everything you can easily buy in a supermarket. Once you're done with the orange, do the same thing with the lemon. Make sure they're both unwaxed, so just dip them in boiling water first. Now, the reason why they traditionally put suet in mince pies is because it doesn't melt at oven temperature and creates a soft, airy texture. So if you just replace suet with butter, which will melt, you will end up with very soggy, greasy pies filled with greasy but dry raisins. But later on, we're going to show you a trick of genius by making the butter behave like suet and not leaking onto the baking tray. Cut the lemon in half and squeeze the juice into a saucepan. It's important to use a saucepan because it will be heated up on the hob in a few minutes, and it's easier to remove the lemon pips if it's squeezed separately. Don't worry about the pips for the moment, we'll remove them later. Now, I know there is a juicy peeled orange staring at you on the table, but don't be tempted to squeeze it as well, because it will make the mixture too moist. Since we're not using sugar, which is a dry substance, all our ingredients are quite moist anyway, so don't overdo it with the juices. Now, add a 300 gram mixture of sultanas and raisins to your orange and lemon zest. And this is an essential ingredient, French brandy. We like to use Courvoisier because I know exactly where it is in the supermarket, and as a man, getting in and out of there quickly is a relief. But we'll give you the real reason in a minute. Use 50 grams in weight, not millilitres. It's just easier to set your scale to one unit of measurement rather than constantly change between grams and millilitres. Now, peel 2 medium-sized apples. The important thing here is that you don't use green cooking apples, but the sweetest red ones you can find in the supermarket. Since we're not using any sugar, we want to maximise the natural sweetness as much as we can. Now, while my partner is peeling the apples, we'll talk about why we're using French brandy. Well, in the past, they used to cure the mincemeat for 4 months to get the fruit inside to ferment and give the pies their distinctive taste. But why bother with this if we can just bring this fruity fermented taste into the mixture in a few seconds? And here's where the French brandy comes in. It's a spirit made out of concentrated fermented grapes. In the past, it would obviously be an enormous luxury, but now it's available in any supermarket. Just make sure you don't substitute it with whiskey or any other grain-based spirit. It's got to be a fermented grapes spirit like cognac or Armagnac. Now, you can see my partner slicing the apples into lemon juice instead of cutting them into cubes like in a traditional recipe. This is because we're going to cook them first. Cook them in lemon juice on medium heat for maybe 15 to 20 minutes until they're absolutely soft and start turning into mash. Then take them off heat and drain the excessive fluid into your raisins. Take care not to drop any apple slices into your raisins if you can. And now for that trick of genius, mash the hell out of them with the blender, and I mean it. Don't skimp on this step. In a few seconds, we're going to add our 50 grams of butter into it, so this apple puree is what will stop the butter from leaking down and ruining your mince pies. The fibres in the apples will stick to the butter and retain it where we want it to be, inside the pie and not on the baking tray. It won't create exactly the same texture as suet would. You will lose a little bit of the airiness of a regular mince pie, but it will still be delicious, and the main point is it will work. Now add 1 tablespoon of allspice, also known as pimento. You can add other spices like nutmeg or ginger, but we find that allspice is enough. Also 1 tablespoon of balsamic vinegar of Modena or any red wine vinegar. This is just to make your apple puree darker, but don't worry if the colour is still not dark enough, it will get darker in the oven later. Don't try substituting it with other types of vinegar that are not dark, as they will not bring any colour. Now combine it all together. The aroma, by the way, is out of this world with this mixture of cooked apples, brandy and allspice. Add 70 grams of honey and mix. That's it, the filling's done. A good idea is to cool it a bit, just to make your life easier when filling the pies later on. In a few seconds, we're going to show you how to make gluten-free pastry. Again, a lot of deviations from traditional methods, but with the sugar and gluten-free ingredients, we need to be a little bit more creative as they behave differently. One of the reasons white sugar is so popular in baking is because it's easier to deal with. It dissolves fast, it's dry, it binds with other ingredients easily, but of course, not everyone is concerned about the health implications. We believe that traditional is not always the best. To make the pastry, break 1 medium or small egg into a bowl and scoop the yolk out. We don't need it. Add 110 grams of maple syrup. Make sure it's a high quality maple syrup and not something that is just flavoured like it. Add 1 teaspoon of salt, whisk it all together and put it aside for a minute. Now, the simple reason is white is more binding than yolk, and since we don't have any gluten in our flour, we just need something that will bind the dough together. In a big bowl, we have 300 grams of gluten-free flour. We've just mixed cassava flour and oat flour, but as you can use any plain gluten-free one if you like. Then we add 1 teaspoon of baking powder, not just soda. Then we add 150 grams of cold butter and rub it all in and turn it into something resembling breadcrumbs. At some point the butter will get too warm and start sticking to your hands. That's where you need to stop. Even if there are still big lumps of butter there, you can add vanilla, nutmeg or any other spices you usually add to biscuits, but we feel it's unnecessary since the filling will be so intensely flavoursome it'll overpower the pastry anyway. So if you don't have any, don't worry. But if you happen to have a ground nutmeg in your cupboard, this is a good time to add half a teaspoon. And now add your egg mixture to the flour and knead it a little bit. The dough should come off your hands at the end and make one lump. It's very difficult to give precise amounts of the ingredients to achieve this. A lot will depend on the size of your egg, on how absorbent your flour is. If it's too crumbly, just add 1 teaspoon of water or the discarded yolk. If it's too sticky and moist, and it looks like it is in this case, just add 1 tablespoon of flour. And I think this is precisely what we're going to do now. The other method is to add your egg mixture to the flour gradually and not in one go like we just did. That way you won't have to add anything extra. After it's done, it should look like this. Now we're going to knead it a little bit more into the shape of a cylinder. If anybody does pottery, this is very similar. You have to bash the air out of it. Now, don't worry if there are still some air pockets, just do the best you can. There's no point rolling the dough out with a rolling pin, even though it is possible to roll gluten-free dough, and I've done it before with the help of parchment paper it's so time consuming and difficult as the dough constantly crumbles and develops cracks. It's much easier to do it the way we're about to show you. It's not crucial how long or thick the cylinder is, as long as the thickness of the cylinder itself is even. When you've shaped the cylinder, make 12 little cuts on it, dividing it into 12 equal parts. This is just simply to fill up a 12-cup baking tray with equal size pies. Cut one slice out. You can keep rolling the dough while you are cutting it. This will help retain the shape. But don't worry if it's not a perfect circle or breaks in your hands. You can patch it up and it will all seal up in the oven anyway. Now flatten it with your fingers in a shape slightly bigger than your cookie cutter. I'm not sure what the advantage of using two hands is, maybe it's a woman thing. Then press the cookie cutter and remove the excess dough around it. Our cutter is 9 cm in diameter, which works as an optimal size for mince pies. Also, if you use one with serrated edges, it will give the crust a more finished look. And with a spatula, pick it up and put it in your mould. Don't forget to grease it with butter first. I wouldn't worry too much about getting them to look perfect. They should look homemade and not store-bought. You are making mince pies from scratch after all. Make it obvious and be proud. We will show you how to make one more pie. I think the first pie we made had too much dough left over and it was too thin. Perhaps it was flattened too much. This time we'll make the circle smaller but thicker. It's all about individual taste, and as you can see, we don't use any extra flour on the counter surface. The dough should easily come off without it. Extra flour in fact will make it 10 times more difficult to handle. Sometimes the pies crack while you press them into the mould. That's absolutely fine, there's no need to redo them. All we have to do is take a small piece of dough out of the leftovers and just patch them up gently in the mould. They will seal up in the oven later anyway. If anyone's wondering what to do with your leftover yolk, you can use it to glaze your pastry before putting it in the oven, and your pies will have a shiny golden glint to them. But ironically, we're sticking to a more traditional look on this occasion since we've broken so many traditions so far. Now, the little leftover balls of dough. We are going to turn them into stars using exactly the same principle with a small star cookie cutter. Just like we did with the pies, flatten them with your fingers and press your star cookie cutter into them. And then use the spatula again and just leave them for a minute on the side of the mould. Just before you start filling your pies, a little trick to make absolutely sure you don't get soggy bottoms. Just sprinkle a little bit of gluten-free flour inside them. However, we've found it's not usually necessary, as the apple puree should do the trick anyway. But we thought we'd share this trick with you, and you can use it for jam tarts as well. Just don't add the flour into your mincemeat mixture, as it will give it an unpleasant beige colour. We don't want this in our mince pies. Now place them in the oven for 25 minutes on 160 degrees. And now we have delicious, as healthy as they can be, mince pies made only from the most wholesome ingredients. Just one more trick before you go. If you want your pies to look as if they're covered in sugar powder, but actually don't want to use sugar, you can use coconut flour. It's almost tasteless, looks like sugar powder, it's healthy as it's just desiccated coconut, and will give your pies a festive traditional look. Your guests won't even catch on that it's not sugar because there's enough sweetness in the pies thanks to the honey and maple syrup. And this is just to prove that there is absolutely no soggy bottom, and before you panic, I'm not about to drop my underpants. Here's our list of all the ingredients as promised. If you are into sugar-free treats, then we recommend our honey chocolate. It's made using only raw honey and organic cacao and no other sweeteners. You can buy it from our website at www.honeycacao.co.uk. Well, thank you for watching our video.